Okay, welcome everyone. Next up, we've got Katie Barnett. She's an Android evangelist at Bilue. Evangelist. Also loves board games, just like Nargis. She's a Google developer expert, and she flies all over giving talks. So we're very lucky to have her on. And she'll be talking about widgets are so hot right now.
Thanks, everyone. So today I'm going to talk about Android widgets and why I think they're so hot right now. So in case you've been living under a rock and don't know what a widget is, I'll just give you a little primer. Most Android devices you can use widgets on. We've been able to use them for years. It's a small interactive application that sits right on your home screen. You can see at a glance information. So every time you open your phone, you can take a look and get the information you need. It gives you great customization of the home screen. You can put what's important to you in the size you want, the arrangement you want. And it allows you to see up-to-date information. If you want something that's refreshing all the time, you can see the latest weather, latest stock prices, anything that's really important to you. And you can know what you need to know frequently. What's something that you need to check every day? There are lots of different types of widgets. We have informational widgets. These are the ones that track that crucial information. Things like the weather, the clock, maybe sports scores might be important to you. Generally, you sort of tap to open more detail. The collection widgets. These are things like might be your gallery, might be articles from a news app or a list of emails. The interaction here is usually browsing and opening, maybe checking things off a list. We also have control widgets. These are ones that allow you to control things like system settings or your smart home. Allows you to interact with different parts of an app without opening the full app. And then there are hybrid widgets. These are ones that fit into the all of the above category. And I do question if you need to make hybrid widgets because having everything together, is that just a mini app? Maybe it might be better to have smaller single-purpose widgets that the user can control how they want to be displayed and only add the features that are important to them. So we need to think about how we're going to design our widgets. If we think about it, widgets are a bit like a teaser for the app, just like that teaser trailer. Or maybe we can think about the information as a snack, where the app is the meal. We don't want to have everything produced all at once. We want to just have a little taste so we know what we can find in the real app. So you want to make sure that the app shows more detail so that people are encouraged to go to the full app and get that full experience. We can also provide navigation links for frequently used parts of our app. So you don't have to every time navigate through multiple screens just to get to one particular piece of information or particular control. You can access it from the top level. You also want to make sure your widget is resizable so the user can customize how it looks on the screen. And when they do resize, we want to make sure it's responsive. So it's going to show different amounts of information and different styling depending on how big it is. So in this example, with a small sort of square widget, we have just the current temperature. With a portrait style, we have the weather over the week, so we can see that. And if we resize it to a landscape size, we can then see the weather over the day. So the user can decide what's important to them. There are lots of limitations, unfortunately. Your widgets must coexist nicely with the home screen. And that means we have really limited gestures that we can use. We can only use touch and vertical swipe because a horizontal swipe might change the home screen positioning. Long press is used for other things as well. So you're really limited with what you can use. There's also limited availability of UI elements, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but this can be a big problem. We also need to consider the update frequency and how often we want to update our widgets. So there's a very simple way of initiating updates, and unfortunately the minimum for that is every 30 minutes. You can't go more frequently. If we use a work manager, the minimum there is 15 minutes, which is okay for some cases, but if you want to be more frequent than that, it gets a lot more complex. There's a lot more infrastructure you need to add. And then your app will get really, really power hungry. And does everybody need to know the exact weather at every minute of the day? Hopefully not. And they might not want their battery drained just for that piece of information. So why are widgets hot right now? Well, as I mentioned, we've had widgets for quite a long time on Android, but a certain other manufacturer has just recently decided that widgets are cool and worked out how to make them work. So suddenly now we care because we can do it on both platforms. So everyone's like, oh, does Android have widgets? And we're like, yeah, we've had them for years. So now is the time to look at widgets because we can make ours really cool because we've already got all the features and hopefully, you know, be cooler than any other platforms. So why am I in particular into widgets? I made this app called Payday. One of my colleagues, Luke, he's speaking later today. He and I had this idea. I don't actually know who had the idea first. To make a simple app which would just tell you if you have like a daily rate or an hourly rate, how much you've earned for the day. We thought this would be really simple. You can say, give users motivation, like, you know, I've earned $100, that's excellent. Or you could just, you know, have it for fun. And I thought it would be a really good option for widgets. So I made this app. I wish I earned $1 million a year. That would be really cool. But, you know, you give me some motivation about how much I'm doing for the day or for the week or month, for example. And I thought widgets would look really cool for this. You could see it on your home screen all the time. They would update all the time, and you'd have that there. So we can see here, I've got a nice little themed one to go with my nice purple background. I've got my widget in the center. I've also got like a little percentage one as well to say how far I'm through the day. I thought this would be super easy and quick, and you know, we were talking about it, and it's like, oh yeah, this will max of 10 hours. This will be super fast. We done? Yeah, no. As I was starting to write these, I was thinking about this talk, so I started looking deeply into widgets. So I claimed that's why the app's not still out, but you know, whatever. So how do we go and build a widget? So we have a recipe, all the things we need to build a widget. Looks like a lot. It's a lot to think about, but we can break it down. So we have our UI section. The UI, what the user will see. We have what we need to make widgets work, make the operating system aware that there is widgets and how to display them. We also need to think about data and updating. This might be optional if your app doesn't really need much updating, so you can probably ignore some of this. There's also theming. I've pulled this out separately from the UI because there's some really interesting things you can do with theming. So first, we're going to talk about UI. So in the past, we had widgets with views. This is the non-Jetpack way, Jetpack Compose way of building widgets, and it uses the remote views XML system. If you've ever built widgets in the past, this is what you would have used. It has really limited UI components. This is just a necessity of remote views, and unfortunately, it also influences what we can do now with Glance. If you are getting into widgets, a real recommendation is check out the view-based documentation. It's actually a lot more full-featured than the Jetpack Compose Glance documentation. So you can refer to this a lot. You just have to replace the UI sections. For example, this lovely diagram, which actually explains how the operating system knows about widgets. None of this is talked about in the Jetpack Compose Glance documentation. So we can use this as a reference as well. I'm just replacing this section with Jetpack Compose Glance. So right now, we have widgets with Glance. This is the declarative UI way of building widgets. It's efficient, it's optimized for updates, just like Jetpack Compose, use recomposition, all that sort of fun stuff. It's backwards compatible with older versions of Android, and fairly simple. If you know how to build Jetpack Compose, you should be fine to build a Glance widget. And it's really customizable. You can match your app branding or your home screen and wallpaper style, which is really cool. And it integrates really well into the rest of your app architecture. So if we want to go about building our UI with Glance, first we need specific dependencies. And these are just for Glance. They're not for the rest of Jetpack Compose, but we just need these ones for Glance. We have the regular app widget 1 plus material 2 and 3 libraries as well. And this uses remote views under the hood. So it means we have the really limited components, just like we have with our remote views. So we only have a specific subset of composables, which gives us a lot of limitations. And unfortunately, also with the previews, we also have a lot of limitations. A lot of things you might be used to doing for regular Jetpack Compose, such as preview parameters or applying wallpaper styling, backgrounds, different device configuration. Unfortunately, you can't do with Glance previews, which is really frustrating because it's something you really need to check on lots of different types of devices. So I hope they improve this in the future. So if we're going to build a UI for a widget, we need to have a Glance app widget class. So pretty much we just have to create this. We have a function to provide Glance. So in here, you can load some data if it's available to you at this point. I'll talk about the more complex situations later. You want to make sure, though, that anything that's long running, you offload to an IO thread or offload to a worker or something else, because you don't want to lock up your UI and make it janky for the user to use. And then we provide content. This is just the same as Jetpack Compose. We put our UI code here, call composables, and we can create what we want. So as we can see, it's just composables. This is a little bit from my, my card widget there. We can see we've got composables here, but not everything is exactly the same. If you really know Jetpack Compose, you might notice some of these arguments are different. There's a few things that look a bit odd. Modifier is now Glance modifier, which is really annoying because a lot of the things are not available for Glance modifier. So we can see that there. Color is now color provider. I haven't really looked into what the advantages of color provider are, but it again means you have to stuff around with creating these on the fly. Text has a lot fewer options. You can't do custom fonts, unfortunately, which is really annoying because I have this lovely custom font for my app, but I have to go back to Roboto for my home screen, which is a pain. And there's a lot of other things you can't do with text as well. Things like even truncation or on global layout listeners and things like that, you just can't do, which is quite frustrating if you're used to using things like that. So one of the most common frustrations that I found with Glance is I really wanted to reuse my app UI. So we have a look at my app. It looks very similar to the widget I used. Can't I just reuse the same composables and make it really quick and easy? No, unfortunately not, because it's using different composables. You will get these weird errors. So example, this one is like, it's looking for a Glance modifier, but finding modifier. Or you get these other errors. This one is from when you're trying to make a preview. You get an error to do with Glance app widget view adapter, which is weird. It talks about a class cast exception, and pretty much this is, you've picked the wrong composable. I really wish they'd have better error messages. So if we have a look at some of the imports, we can see that for the widget, we're using Glance, whereas for the app, we're using Compose. And so a lot of the composables that we might use in regular apps now have different imports. And the package is not just different, it's also the arguments you pass in. So you can't just automatically copy paste, unfortunately. And many components just don't exist, and especially a lot of the modifiers, as I mentioned. None of these things exist for the widget, so it makes it a bit hard if you're trying to replicate the same thing. So we talked about UI, and once you get a handle on what composables are available, that's pretty much okay. Now let's make the widgets work. So back to our diagram here, we've replaced this section with Jetpack Compose and Glance app widget. We don't need a broadcast receiver anymore. We're going to use a Glance app widget receiver. So now we need to do this first part. We need to let the app know, we need to let the operating system know that the app has a widget. And then we can do some updating later with coroutine worker. So we need to declare that that widget is available. We can use an app widget provider, which is an XML file which has all the information about our widget. We can pass in an initial layout. The default one's just a spinning wheel, so that as any data is loading, we can show something nice to the user. We can pass in our widget description, letting the user know what this widget does, what it's about. You don't get much space, only 2 lines, so keep it short. And we can add some previews. So I've added some previews for my widgets. They look pretty good, attractive to the users, so they know what they're getting. We can also set how we can resize our widget. So whether we can go in the horizontal or vertical space, and what the initial size and width is. So we can say this is the ideal shape for this widget. We can also set our widget to be configurable. That means we can set the data source. You might want to set the city if it's a weather widget. You might want to, in this case, setting a rate that you can be paid at. You need to set some sort of information to the widget so it knows what data to show. So we can set the configuration. I'll talk about that in a moment. We can also set the update frequency. This is the simple way. So this is the minimum 30 minutes one. You can pop this update here and it will just rerun and recompose your widget every time it comes through. You can do this even at like the level of days. It's in milliseconds. So you could have this running once a day. You could have it running every couple of hours or every 30 minutes if you really want to. So the next thing we need is the Glance app widget receiver. This can be super simple. It can just be this little bit of code here. All this is a receiver. It's working like a broadcast receiver. It tells us which UI to load, and then we need to declare this in the manifest. So we have our receiver. We have an intent filter to tell us that this is a widget, and whenever widget is updated, we want to run this receiver. And then we pass in that app provider info that we have here. So we just pass in that XML so we know that we have the widget information. We can make our widget receiver more complicated. We hack into any of these callbacks that happens when the widget changes. So when the first instance of widget is added, or the last instance is removed, don't forget we can have multiple instances of the same widget. We can run different code. So this might be signing up for data updates or cancelling them when we remove the last one. So you really want to make sure you do that. If a new instance is added, we can enqueue some updates. And if the widget size is changed, we can also ask the app to relay out the widget. I have simplified this a little bit. It's a little bit more complex than what I've got up here, but you can get all the information you need from the widget options and then resize, maybe adjust the text size or what you're displaying for your widget. We need to handle our errors, and there are two different types of errors to handle. The recoverable error we can just handle in our UI code. So if we don't have the data we expect, we can just show a nice error screen or recover in some way. If it's an unrecoverable error, like the composing does not work at all, something goes wrong with the widget receiver, it can't find any data, it can't find any state, we can pass in an XML layout just to show in the last case, everything has broken, please re-add our widget. So that's really all you need to get a basic widget displaying on the screen. The next thing is data and updating, and this is where I spent most of my time. The configuration, first of all. We want to launch an activity every time we add the widget and make sure that the user can select the data they want. So we need to declare an activity. This has an intent filter with app widget configure. So this means that it knows this is a configuration activity. Then in our provider XML, we can pass in this activity so we know which one to call. And by adding this, it means that this activity will be called on add. We can also add the feature that it's reconfigurable, which means if I long press on my widget, it will show this little update button. So by clicking that, we can reconfigure that widget and change the data source if we want to. You can also add another parameter here if you only want it on edit only. So that means when the user adds the widget, it will show some sort of initial screen if you'd like to. Or neither, you don't have to have configuration at all. If your widget just exists, it doesn't need any extra information in order to run. The next thing to look at is widget data and state. So the state is how the widget is getting its data. It's what it looks like. It's all the data that it has. And we want to make sure that every time the state changes, for example, the time increases, the weather changes, something else, your sports team has a match and you want to show the new scores, we need to make sure that this is updated. And it's the app's responsibility to do the update and call it. So what we can do is we can use the widget and update all of the widgets at once, or update only specific ones if a certain predicate is met. The basic version of state management is we can use preferences. This uses preference data store under the hood, as you can see here. And with the app widget state here, we've got preferences. We've just got a key. We set a string value. You can even put JSON in a string and pass that in this way if you want to make it super simple. And then we can read these in our UI code just by pulling the current state with the key and get the value we want. So this is using preferences data store and preferences glance state definition. There is an advanced version, which is something I played around with, is to use a custom glance state definition. And this is when you have a serializable data object and you don't want to serialize to a JSON string back and forward. And you can use any backing type of mechanism for this. So you can use a room database, a data store, you can pull directly from a URL or something like that. You can do this the way you want to. There's a little bit more to set up in this case. And it can get a little complex, so I recommend trying the easy version first with just a few strings and then go down this path. I was going to talk about that in a little bit more detail, but I didn't have time. I am going to write a blog post on it, so watch out for that one. So you want to make sure you're updating your widget on things like data save, maybe on app open, or periodically. So now we want to set the state. For an immediate update, it's pretty straightforward. An example here is what we would do in a configuration activity. I have a function to say, I need to call my Glance app widget manager, and I need to get the Glance ID. So each widget that's done by Glance has its own Glance ID. We can fetch this from the widget manager. We have that value, so we can update the state. Again, we're going to add those preferences and pass that information. So now we've updated the state, we then need to tell the UI that there's a new state and it can update. So we can call the update function. And this will update just a specific widget, or I could use that update all function that I showed previously. Then if we are in the configuration activity, we need to set the extra that we've got an app widget ID, we've done everything we need to do and the result's okay, and then we can finish the activity and it will go back to the home screen. If we want to set the state for a periodic update, we can use a coroutine worker because we want to offload anything that's going to be long running onto a different thread, onto a worker thread. And this will do this in the background and won't impact the rest of your app or your device behavior. Coroutine worker is quite handy. You can even add features in here that will make sure the device is in a particular state when it does the update. For example, charging. If you only want this to update overnight while the user's charging their phone and not use up their battery, it will also usually put itself to sleep, and when you reopen your device, it will then try and do the update again. So it won't unnecessarily use your battery. So we have that here. You can inject your dependencies in here using dependency injection, which is really helpful. It's a bit harder to do that with the immediate update. And we can provide our worker name. So in this case, I've got a unique work name for all of my widgets. I want this to run for all widgets just once. But you can also run it for every single widget separately if all of them have a different time you want the update to occur. I then need to enqueue this. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but if you're having a look into Work Manager and Coroutine Worker, this is the stuff we want to look at. So we can see we have a minimum of 15 minutes. This is the most frequent we can make this update. You can do other things with alarm receivers and various other bits and pieces. If you want to make it more frequent, don't. Then we need to also make sure we're handling cancelling this. So once we have removed all our widgets or our app is uninstalled, we want to make sure we cancel all of our currently running workers. So when we want to do the work, we might want to fetch the current state. So we can fetch out Glance Manager, we can get the Glance ID, we can go fetch the state, have a look at that state, maybe use an ID from that state and then update based on a data repository, pass this back into our preferences or our custom one if we have that, and then request all our widgets to update. Then also make sure you're handling any exceptions that might occur. So in this case, I'm just going to simple try catch, and I've got a back off strategy as well. So I can retry this update. Maybe if this was coming from a network request or something like that, I can retry. So we might also want to handle user interactions. For example, the user refreshing the state manually. We've got a few options. We can just load an activity. This might be if we want to click on the app, click on the widget and open the app. We can just add a clickable. We have an action start activity that we can call, and this will allow you to put anything in the intent and open the activity. We also can start a service. So if you want to run a service in the background or in the foreground, you can also tie this into a clickable. We can also just use lambdas as well. Call whatever we want to do, show something, make the widget update. In this case, I just made it update immediately. And then we've also got the action run callback. So we can do a callback when we want to run anything. You do want to make sure you offset anything long running into your coroutine worker. That's pretty good. We've done data and updating. Theming, the next interesting thing. You can use the Glance theme. It's just like the material theme, except it's only API for color. Anything like your typography or anything else that you might be used to using, which is super useful, you just have to use top level variables. All our colors use color providers again, so we can provide light and dark. And I've just passed in the theme that I use for the regular app for the colors here. So we can say I've got a light and a dark version. And we can access our colors just like regular material themes, except this time we're using Glance theme. Now, what if I want to blend this in with my wallpaper? If I had this lovely purple wallpaper, putting the green on top would be quite jarring. So I want to make it look really nice and blend in like I've done here. So on supported devices, I think it's Android 12 and above, we want to use the device theme. What we can do when we're creating our theme, we can actually use the Glance theme colors. And these are colors that are themed based on what the user has set. So if you've ever changed your theme on your device, when you change your wallpaper, you can also change the colors you use. This is where you can set the kind of color scheme that you want to use. So we can tie this into those Glance theme colors and have a fallback to just use your app colors instead. If you want to match with the app icons, I did have to do a little bit of trial and error for this because it's not documented whatsoever. But if you want the background, use widget background, and then on background is the primary if you want to match it nicely with those icons. There's a whole suite of colors you can use. What if you want to stand out from the background? If I have this widget, in this case, it's just this little heart with some text here that kind of looks like an app icon. That looks really nice on this white screen, right? But it does not look nearly as nice on the black. It's there, it's still there. Even if I go and change my theme colors, I tried to pick one that was light as possible, still can't see it. This hasn't updated, no matter what color I choose. What can I do? We can look at the wallpaper itself. So we can use Wallpaper Manager, get the Wallpaper Manager, and get the wallpaper colors. In this case, flagging for the system ones. I'm going to have a state variable for using the dark color. Got a function to use dark color on wallpaper. I'm going to pass those colors in. I'm also going to listen in on when the wallpaper changes, because it might be all right when I add the widget and I get the right color, but what if the user has just wants to change the wallpaper or has one of those launchers that lets you change the wallpaper frequently? We need to be able to listen to this. So we can also call our method here whenever the colors are changed. What is this function to get the dark color? What we do, we pass in those wallpaper colors, and we have our type, which in this case, I'm looking for the system wallpaper. I don't really care about the box screen wallpaper in this instance. Then for Android versions S and above, we have this lovely feature, which is a color hint. And this says that we can say the color scheme supports dark text. And this says, oh, yep, the wallpaper colors, dark text is best. The operating system has decided this, and this is what controls whether the app icon names are dark or light. We can hook straight into this. There's also this dark theme one as well, and you can also hook into that as well if that's useful too. But if you're using an older version of Android, you do kind of need to do a bit of the maths yourself. So you can fetch the color. In this case, I'm going to just grab the primary color. You also have the secondary and tertiary colors available to you as well. And then I've got this function, color is dark advanced. I just pulled this straight from Stack Overflow. Somebody else can do the maths for me. Yeah, go find it if you want to find it. Find your own way of deciding if a light or a dark color is appropriate for you. So now, no matter which wallpaper I have a nice light or dark theme for my widget. So it means it's going to show up really nicely. If I did move this widget up into the top corner, it still wouldn't look very nice, but at least it's picking the majority color off the wallpaper. So that's pretty good with theming. We're pretty okay. Done UI, the widgets are going to work, data and updating, pretty much the end. That was like really easy and quick, right? Yeah, it's pretty good. But it's not too bad. Once you get started, it's pretty easy. And then if you want to make multiple widgets, it's just a copy-paste exercise. So pretty good. Okay. Here's a bunch of useful links. I didn't include everything. Most of these, the useful sources can be found under the Jetpack Glance and view-based widgets overview screens. There's a whole lot of information in there. There's some samples. I found the samples quite difficult to use. They abstract a lot of information and sort of say, just fill this in here, but make a lot of assumptions about what your data source is and things like that. So use it at your peril. My colleague Luke, he wrote this on macOS. Looks completely different from mine. Feel free to go grab that if you like. I'm going to write a few blog posts on this. Unfortunately, I haven't had a chance yet to do that. But a lot of the code I'll pop on there as well. Please ping me if you'd like anything specific. And I will get my app out soon, I promise. Hopefully, once Devfest is over, I will be able to get this out. Any questions if we have time?
there any system-wide cycle events that you can do, like some top alternative to follow, or like, you know, if someone unlocks their phone or if they scroll onto a view that the widget resides on?
I haven't seen any yet, especially for scrolling on. Unlocking your phone, you probably could, hook into that with a worker, so that it's your app that every time unlocks potentially. But scrolling into view, not really. Just the resizing, app update, widget update, widget add, that sort of thing, is what I've found so far. But so much of that is not documented whatsoever. Most of that I found through trial and error and through looking at the samples. It's not there. But if you find something, let me know. Any other questions?
How stable is it? You know, like your technology, your code, sometimes it works as advertised, sometimes it doesn't.
We have had this for years. I had widgets on my first Android phone, and that was a Nexus 1.
Yeah, but forget about the Compose version.
Yeah, Glance. So, it's stable. There's not many experimental items in there. It's just like regular Jetpack Compose, but there's just not as many features. So I think once they've got it in regular Jetpack Compose, they're gradually moving it across. But because the backing is remote views, you can't use everything. And also I think because they don't want people to have super fancy things. Like I want to have like a nice animation, and I think they're like, we don't want the homepage animating.
Oh, there's no animation. Yeah.
Not that I've found yet. I need to do a bit more investigation, but a lot of things are not available. And I think they want our widgets to be working, but to be simple and look nice with everything else.
Follow-up question, because in my company we use a lot of paparazzi for snapshot tests.
Yeah.
There's probably paparazzi is not going to be there, but there's this new alpha thing that Google is doing.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you're aware, to like compare, like produce an image.
Yep.
And then you render your UI and then you compare.
So I don't know about the new system. I know with paparazzi you can use regular Jetpack Compose. This does produce a preview, so you potentially could hook into that to produce that image. Maybe with Showcase. I'm not sure if Showcase will work with widgets. I haven't had a chance to look at that. But if you find anything interesting, please let me know.
What testing coverage has it got?
I have not done any testing. I wanted to do this in 10 hours. It took me significantly longer than 10 hours, including doing it on my plane to my holiday. So I have not even thought about testing. But really everything, the coroutine worker and the app widget receiver, that's just a broadcast receiver. So you can test all of that. Coroutine workers, you can 100% test. That's all the data testing. The Glance itself, it should just be UI code. If you're doing any calculations or doing major data changes or lookups there's a problem. You should have uploaded that somewhere else. So, I mean, just would be the snapshot testing, I think, or UI testing. I'm not aware of any UI testing available for it, and I would be surprised if it is available.